There are a lot of videos out there about ADHD and autism, and because they often co occur, they're usually talked about together. But when it comes to actually explaining them, especially in the context of ADHD, most approaches fall short. You either get a long list of traits that jumble the two together, or a clinical breakdown that looks at them separately without ever explaining how to tell them apart in real life. So today, we're doing something different. This video will help you understand where the differences really are and how each diagnosis affects your brain in a distinct way. Let's start with ADHD. ADHD isn't just about being distracted or restless. At its core, ADHD affects your brain's ability to manage attention, regulate impulses, and follow through on goals. These skills are part of something called executive functioning. And when that system doesn't run smoothly, you start to notice the same struggles showing up again and again. Now, inattention can show up in ways that are often misunderstood. It's not just spacing out, it's getting so lost in a thought you miss what someone just said, reading a paragraph 5 times and still not absorbing it, constantly misplacing things, not because you're careless, but because your working memory is already overloaded. It's avoiding complex or boring tasks, not from laziness, but because your brain literally can't build the momentum to get started. Then there's hyperactivity and impulsivity. But that doesn't always mean bouncing off the walls. It can feel like your mind is racing 24/7 or like you're interrupting people even though you didn't mean to. Sometimes it's blurting things out before the thought is fully formed. Sometimes it's that restless urge to move, even when you're completely worn out. Now, some people experience mostly inattention, others mostly hyperactivity, and some experience both at once, switching depending on the day or environment. That variation can make it harder to filter, prioritize, and pause. You might jump into action before thinking or get stuck cycling through disorganized and racing thoughts. You try to act, but you're often unable to identify what step comes first. And underneath all of this is dopamine dysregulation. But it's not all about brain chemistry. It changes how motivation actually works, how your brain decides what's worth doing and when. In a neurotypical brain, even anticipating a reward like finishing a task or meeting expectations can activate the dopamine system enough to create motivation and get started. But in ADHD, that reward doesn't activate the same way, especially when the task feels abstract or far away. So even when you care about the outcome, your brain doesn't register the task as worth starting. That's why urgency, novelty, or emotional intensity can flip the switch. They activate dopamine, and suddenly the task feels possible, even exciting. It's not a conscious choice, it's your brain using a workaround to jumpstart engagement. And it's one reason consistency is so hard, even when you're motivated. So, ADHD isn't just about distraction, it's about regulation and it's about momentum. You're pulled by the loudest thing, the newest thing, the most urgent thing, not guided by calm internal structure. And this is where the distinction really becomes important because autism operates in a very different way. Autism is fundamentally different from ADHD, not just in the traits, but in what it affects. Autism is about how your brain takes in the world, interprets it, and responds, often with a focus on patterns, predictability, and internal logic. It's not about being reactive, it's about trying to create stability in a world that often feels unpredictable. One of the most noticeable areas autism affects is social communication. This is not about being shy. It's a neurological difference in how communication is processed and expressed. You might struggle with back and forth conversation. Maybe you talk in monologues. Maybe you go quiet and hope the other person will keep the dialogue going. You might miss tone, sarcasm, or facial expressions even when you understand the literal meaning of the words. You might delay your responses, script your reply, or freeze in fast moving conversations because the pace doesn't give you time to process. That doesn't mean you don't care, it means social cues don't come automatically. You might avoid eye contact because it's overwhelming, or hold it too long because you were told it's polite. You might not gesture when you speak, or your facial expressions might not match what you're feeling. Relationships can also be confusing. Adjusting how you show up in different settings like work versus a party might not come naturally. Unspoken rules like how close to stand or when to speak might feel like a foreign language. You might crave connection but struggle to maintain it beyond small talk, especially if you feel like you're performing a role rather than being yourself. Autism also affects how you handle sameness, repetition, and interest. You might repeat movements or words like tapping, rocking, or echolalia, not for attention, but because it's calming. You might need routine. You might take the same route, eat the same food, do things in a specific order because it helps you feel anchored. You might have deep, specific interests that take up a lot of space, not because you're obsessed, but because that focus brings clarity and calm. And then there's sensory input. You might be overwhelmed by bright lights or loud sounds, or seek out specific textures or patterns to self soothe. Autistic brains don't filter the world like non autistic people. You're absorbing more and processing more, which takes a toll. In ADHD, you react to the world as it comes at you. In autism, you try to shape the world to match what your brain expects. You're constantly working to manage sensory input, hold structure, and make sense of a social world that often doesn't make sense back. It's not about being rigid or aloof. It's about trying to function in environments that weren't built for your way of thinking. And that distinction of how you process versus how you regulate is what finally helps you make sense of your AuDHD experience. Because when both systems are running in the same brain, things get tangled. You might crave novelty like someone with ADHD, but panic when your routine is disrupted like someone with autism. You might blurt something out impulsively, then spiral later because you broke an unspoken social rule. You might struggle with time blindness, but still need everything around you to be predictable and just so. That push pull between urgency and rigidity, stimulation and structure is what makes ADHD more than a double diagnosis. It's a completely different experience. That's why it's so common to feel misunderstood even after getting both labels. And that is because the world still expects you to fit into one box or the other. And the truth is, you don't. But now you understand what each diagnosis actually affects, how ADHD changes how you regulate and respond, and how autism shapes how you process and interpret. You can finally start to identify where your challenges are really coming from, not just in general, but in the moment. You can start to ask, is this impulsivity or sensory overload? Is this task avoidance or a need for structure? Is this distraction or burnout? The more clearly you can see the systems underneath, the more equipped you are to support both without forcing yourself to act like you're only one or the other. This understanding of what each diagnosis actually affects is the foundation. It's what lets you finally make sense of how your brain works and why it sometimes feels like you're being pulled in opposite directions. The reality is that your brain works on two operating systems, and once you understand how to recognize them, you can finally learn how to manage them. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you next time.